you guys have to have more disrespect in your game for your opponent. Your opponent sucks. I suck. Everyone sucks. Humans suck at poker.
The truth is, when you're willing to be wrong more often, you're learning at the fringes of your knowledge more often.
I do have some pretty strong opinions about preflop, where I think that people treat it as this like boring static street, and I actually think it's like the most complicated, most interesting street by far.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Seeking Balance podcast. This week we have Chris Brewer. Chris is a friend, but also happens to be one of the best tournament players in the world. If you don't know who he is, you certainly should. It was a very enlightening conversation about how dynamic preflop can be, and he laid out a lot of knowledge about how to improve your preflop strategies and approach it in a more fluid and interesting way. We also touched on in the beginning his recent running challenge and some politically adjacent topics. But before long, we get into some really deep and interesting poker ideas. So without further ado, I bring you Chris Brewer. All right, Chris, thanks for doing this, man.
No problem.
Yeah. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm leaving for Korea tomorrow, so be ready for like a big month of poker. And stayed up late last night because I started to try to adjust time schedule a little because I have like a 11 a.m. flight, which is very not ideal for international travel. You're just wide awake on the flight. So idea is I stayed up to like 4 a.m. last night, stay up to like 4 or 5 a.m. tonight, and then that way I can actually sleep on the plane.
Did you last time you were in JJ, you had really bad sleep, right?
No, so I never have sleep issues, but what I had last time in Jeju, so the ale quality is low there. It's not their fault. They get pollution from factories from China. There's nothing they can really do about it, but I was having trouble with that, and I was having trouble eating enough because the portions are a lot smaller, and we would play till like 11, and all the food places would close at like 8. So I was just not eating enough and slightly struggling with the ale quality, and I just felt like I couldn't breathe. And then when I came back, I went like a week where I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I thought the whole time it was like acid reflux. So I was being like careful about what I was eating, which was the worst way to go about it. But no, it was good sleep wise. I think this time I'll be better. I'm bringing a bunch of instant oatmeal packets.
Did you? Interesting. Did you ever try those like O2? Like you can get those like breathable O2 things?
No, I haven't tried that. I think it was mostly a food thing. I mean, I've looked this up. Like, if you're really hungry, you can feel like you're out of breath. It's not like a weird thing. And it can make you like feel like you have acid reflux because you like don't have stuff in your stomach. Yeah. So like, I've chatted with other people. So like, I know Stevie. He does the dehydrated like meals. Actually, he'll like bring a bunch of them. Like
he
the type you would use,
them?
like. I think they come prepackaged, but like type you would use like camping or something, almost like an MLE, I guess, but not quite that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of like planning food for these international trips is something that people don't account for the first few times you do it.
Yeah, I bet. Do you fly in much early?
Yeah, so I'm flying in tomorrow. I'm gonna start playing poker on the 20th, but the first event's like a 10k, so it's on the small side. So 10, 15, 20, which is the Poker Dream series, and then go into Triton and the high stakes.
Nice. You looking forward to it? You feeling good about
it? Yeah. I probably did less prep for this one than I have in the past. Just been busy with other things, but I'm still excited. It's always fun, and hopefully things go well.
Yeah. How was you said busy with other stuff? Is that mostly like your running challenge? I don't know if you want to talk much about it, but
I mean, a little bit with that. That was definitely one of the things. I've mostly been busy just playing. I've been playing like some cash games online that of different formats. So I've been playing like some 5-card PLO and stuff, and that's been I've been putting more effort there, so I've been less focused on tournaments. Not that there's still my primary focus, but just a little bit more cash. But yeah, the running challenge, That was fun. Well, the ending wasn't fun. So for those who don't know, I had a running bet against Brandon Adams. We started it back in September. The deal was so at the beginning, I guess I'll just give even the background for that. I was completely out of shape at the time. I hadn't ran in probably 3 years. He had lost a running bet to Huck, but had been running consistently. He wanted to make some type of bet. I didn't want to make it particularly high stakes, which we didn't make it huge or anything. And we were going to run a 5K in January. We were both going to train for it. If I lapped him once, I'd win small. If I lapped him twice, I'd win big. Or if I didn't lap him, I would lose. And if he beat me straight up, he would win big. But beating me straight up was not a true possibility, except for the fact that when we actually did the bet, I forgot that we had that part of the bet on because it was so out of play, right? Like, by the time we went and so the actual race day, I ended up dropping out with a lap and a half to go with a 325 meter lead on him. So I was about a little less than a quarter lap from lapping him. I had a lap and a half to go. It was a little frustrating. His coach told me I had 2.5 laps to go, which really broke my soul and was part of the reason I stepped off. And then I realized, whatever. I mean, it's my fault, but I just didn't realize that I forgot that the fact that if I dropped out, I'd lose the straight up bet. So I ended up just getting the clean sweep against me, which was very frustrating.
Well, it was frustrating for the reasons, right? Like you felt because you forgot. I imagine that was
it was frustrating. Yeah. I think the not lapping him, Paul, I wasn't too mad about. I had a pretty bad day. It was like an 80-degree day in Florida, but there was no lack of F from me. I could have trained better than I did, but I was also traveling and playing a lot of poker. So like I had the Montenegro and the Bahamas trip while in training. I live in New Jersey, which during the winter is not exactly Jersey City in the winter is not exactly like your prime training spot. So I had a lot of things not going my way. So like I don't think, as far as like my prep went, I think I did a good job given my circumstances, but I don't think I had like amazing prep. So it's not shocking that I wasn't as fit as I would have liked to be for the 5K day, but dropping out and losing the straight up was extremely frustrating.
Yeah, I can. I mean, it makes sense though. Like, right, you from September to January, your main focus is lapping. Like, that's kind of like the thought that's going on in your head is like, like
exactly. Like all I had thought for a while, I'd been focused on trying to lap him twice. I began to think that was probably pretty unlikely, and I was like very focused on lapping him once, and that was the only thing I thought about. And then like the day of, I thought I'd be able to run like 17:45 or something for the 5K. So I went out in 83, second lap, which is like right about where I wanted to be. I think I came through 2 miles and about on pace, and then I just started running very slow. My last lap was a 100-second lap. I went and looked at like my heart rate stuff after because I had my watch on. I don't know. Like I was at like so I started off fine. Like my first few laps looked normal. I'm like at 150 or something. By like right after a mile, I got up to like 188, and I was at 188 for about 10 minutes. So that's like, so that's like 98% of my max heart rate, and I held it for 10 minutes, which you're not really even like. I feel like when I saw that, I was like, well, I wasn't like being a wimp.
Yeah. Sure.
Like that's a pretty high effort.
It's funny because you gave backstory, but like to give even more backstory for those who don't know, like you were a collegiate runner, a professional runner. I don't know at what level you ran.
I was very high end collegiate. So I ran at University of Oregon. Oregon's like the Duke or Alabama football program for track. So Eugene is considered Tracktown USA. So when I was there, I think we won 6 national championships in track. I think 2 outdoor and 4 indoor, maybe 3 indoor, or something like that. I wasn't amazing in college. I was good. I would say I would be equivalent to being like the somewhere between like the 7th or 8th guy on like the Duke basketball roster, or maybe like so like
So that's really good for any human.
Like the best thing I did is I got 7th at Pac-12s my 5th year. So like I did score at a Pac-12 meet. I was a 343 1500 runner and a 758 3K runner. So those were my 2 best things. But like, so I would, well, I don't know, I should see national ranking. I was probably top 100 to 200 in the nation. But like most of the people I was training with were top 20 to 40.
Damn. That's wild. Yeah. Oh, so like in your group, you felt bad. Like,
So my 1500 group, my 5th year was me, this guy Blake Haney, this guy Sam Prakel, Matthew Maton, and then sometimes we would do some stuff with this. It was a 5K runner, but there was Edward Cheserek. So Edward Cheserek was a 17-time national champion in college. So he ended up being a 348 miler. Blake Haney ended up being a 355. Sam Prakel, I think, is 349 or 350. And then Matthew Maton, he quit after his freshman or sophomore year, but he ran in high school. He was a 359 miler, so he was like a very elite high school runner. So I was the only one in the group that didn't break 4 minutes in the mile, which was frustrating.
Still, I mean, like that's insane.
But yeah, so the group I was running with was they were all people who would at some point in their career make the. Actually, Blake never did, but they were all people who were top 25 in the nation at some point in their career, I guess. And then also
whoever Blake is just catching strays right now.
No. Blake was awesome. He got 2nd at nationals. I was just thinking that he made an Olympic trials final, but I think he had injury issues. I think Sam is the only one that ended up making Olympic trial finals. Sam's gotten a bunch of 4th to 5th places at USA's, which, by the way, I don't know if anyone knows the track world. It is the most brutal sport in the world in terms of like how much effort you put in and what you get and like the way the money is set up. So if you don't get top 3 at a US competition, you don't get to go to a world championship. If you don't go to a world championship, your contract value is a lot less. So like I have 2 teammates that got 4th in back-to-back Olympics trials. So Luke Busquedra got back-to-back at the marathon, and Alec Jenkins in the 5K got back-to-back. And like it's a brutal spot because instead of going to the Olympics and gain all the Olympic money, that your life goal of being an Olympian, you're the guy that got 4th place. I remember who got 4th place because they were my friends, but no one else does. There's not quite a sport that's as savage as that as like you only the world championship is every 2 years and Olympics is every 4 years. So like you fail's a bad term, but you don't get the goal you wanted, and then you have to just go back and train for 2 to 4 more years, and you have a 10-year, 12-year career.
And I mean, it also has to be some of the most like. It's like not just is it brutal in the way that it's structured, but I imagine it's just incredibly competitive because it is so. Yeah, it's like such a foundational sport, if that makes sense. It's running, like it's everyone can run. Like
I could be biased, but in my opinion, track and field is the hardest sport in the world to be elite at because every other sport has a barrier of entry of some kind. I think the next one would be soccer. Like anyone can kind of grab a ball and kick it around, but like. Even basketball, like you need a basketball hoop to shoot on, right? Like football, obviously you need all the pads. Swimming, you need a swimming pool. Like everything else, there's this big barrier to entry. But like every single kid at some point in their life goes out and runs. If you're a fast sprinter, you know you're a fast sprinter. So like, in my opinion, Usain Bolt is far and away the greatest athlete to ever walk this planet. And I don't even think it's close. Because like he is clearly the best ever at something that every single person ever has done. While like I know that like Djokovic is an amazing tennis player, and I'm not saying that Djokovic isn't maybe the best tennis player ever, but there's like a much more real possibility that there's someone born somewhere that just never picked up a tennis racket.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually, this is like, like I said, before you even described this is exactly what I was thinking. It's just like, what does it take to figure out if you're good at running? Like, you will know if you're a great runner. If you're born a great runner, you will know. You will know, like, wow, I just seem to smoke everybody whenever we run anywhere. Like,
yeah, I mean, maybe you won't get into it. Maybe you won't train. So, like, obviously, we still lose kids. Maybe you live in America and you're Tyreek Hill and you decide to play football. Like, there's ways that people don't end up in track, obviously, but it's much less so, I think, than other sports where like you just never try it.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. How I've never heard this. How do you go from that to poker? Like, what happened there?
When I was when I went to college, I had never played a hand of poker. I had never thought about gambling in any way. I think it's a very fluke thing that I ended up in it. I don't think there was like, if there was like some multiverse where, you know, like my life gets ran out an infinite number of times, I think this is like a low probability outcome. I think like most of them, I am either like a track coach at some college or I'm working in finance on Wall Street. I think those are like the two more likely outcomes. But what ended up happening was once I was at Oregon, in 2012, so Eugene hosts the Olympic trials every year. I wasn't running them, but I stayed to watch my freshman summer. And that summer, like, we decided to play like a few home games of poker, you know, like the $3 tournaments or whatever. I thought it was fun. That was the extent of it. Then later on the next year, one of my friends wanted to go to the local cold room, which I didn't even know existed. It was called Full House Poker. I'll give them a shout out. Awesome poker room ran by Justin Zinzel, who is still a friend of mine to this day. I do a fantasy football league with him, and yeah, I have very good things to say about this room. But the way so I went and played. They had a tag team tournament, so it's actually a pretty fun structure. You pay like you and your teammate pay $40 each. You both get a stack at the end of every level. You have to switch stacks with your teammate. It's yeah, and then like if you get to the final table, like you're allowed to collude, like that's totally fine. You're like, but you can't be at the same stack until like at the same table until the final table. Had like a 40, I think it had a $30 add-on too, and like we played that. It was very fun. So like I started playing that a bunch of Tuesdays, just with my teammate, and I think we won one time. I don't think we had anything like super successul, but I enjoyed it.
Was that the last time you had fun playing poker?
Yeah, that was it. Never had fun since. No, I yeah, been downhill ever since, but you know. Yeah. No, so then like at some point I ended up deciding to like try playing cash games. So they have the way that the Eugene or the way Oregon and I think Washington is the same rule for poker works is you can't rake a poker game. So there was no rake, but obviously the rooms need to make money, so they all operate as membership clubs. So it's as if you're joining like a golf club. So you pay whatever $300. You have a year membership, and then you pay a entry fee when you buy into the game or whatever. So the way it worked at Full House is you paid your membership fee and then you showed up. You paid 5% on your buy-in, capped at $500. So you could buy $2,000 of chips. You pay $25 a rake for the day. You're playing 1-2. You have to return the chips at the end of the day and get cash back. So there's no like leaving you can never leave with chips because they need the 5% fee. But that's like generally how it went. So an incredibly low rake 1-2 game, which is like obviously, yeah, it's an unreal situation to luck into. So like right when I started playing cash, I ran super hot. I think I won like $2,000. I lost it back. I wasn't good, but I'm just saying it was like this fun experience. And I was like, oh, that was fun. That was like my sophomore year. And I started like reading 2+2, kind of getting into it, but nothing too crazy. And then my junior year, I had this like recalling set of strep throat that kind of ended my track season. So like I was sick for about a month straight on and off. And it was like right in the heat of spring. And there was no chance of me having a successful season. So like we called it quits, and I was just like going to get ready for cross country. So I didn't even like have to show up to practice. So I just had a bunch of time and was like, oh, I'm going to play a bunch of poker now. And then I started actually winning, and it became like a job for me in college. And I don't know, I made $40 an hour for 3 years of playing 1-2.
Nice. When did you like start having ambitions of actually like being, and that was your job, but like, when did it become like, no, I want to do this professionally. I want to like be competitive. I want to be one of the best at this. Like,
I mean, those were different steps. So saying like, hey, this is something I can make money at. This is fun. That was like step one. Saying like, okay, I don't really want to walk. I would like to play this. That was like probably like my senior year or something. Like I remember in my head, I just like had done the math, and I was like, oh, if I'm making $40 at 1-2, I didn't like, I mean, I'm not saying this was true, but I was just like, oh, if I just go play 5-10, like I'm going to end up making $200 an hour. Yeah. I was like, if I make $200 an hour, like, dude, I could play 40 hours a week of a game, and like, I'm going to be rich.
Yeah. Sure.
So like, it was bullshit, but like, wow, maybe I thought it was too easy. I do think that like, I was kind of right. Like I wasn't going to get paid as much as I was going to get paid at poker when I graduated. And so like I was pretty set on that. My parents were pretty cool about it. So like as long as I was going to get a college degree, and which I did, and as long as I wasn't going to like build up any type of debt or anything, like they were kind of okay. They're like, hey, if you like gamble away like what is your liquid money, and like you have some savings, and like you like it doesn't work out for you and you have to go get a job 7 months in or go to grad school or whatever, like you'll be okay. So they will pretty like if you really want to give this a try, go ahead. I don't think they thought it would succeed, but
yeah.
But so yeah, I mean that's what happened. And then
privately, they're like, Chris will learn from this failure. That's what they're thinking.
Exactly. I think that was kind of the thing. Like, okay, he'll fuck this up, but you know, it's like fine. Like he has set up. I mean, this is privilege. I mean, for what it's worth, when people talk about like what being a privileged kid is, this is the example, right? You're just allowed to go gamble, and if you fail, it's fine because like your life is set up in a way that you're gonna succeed at some point.
You know what's funny is I come from a very not wealthy family. My parents were very, very poor, and the first thing I started doing in terms of gambling was not poker, but was blackjack. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I ran a card counting team. Yeah. So I ran a card counting team.
Yeah.
But what's funny is the kind of support I got from my parents was different, because for them, it was like this naive certainty that I would be rich, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it was this different kind of, well, first of all, my mother's Korean. So her intuitions that gambling, it was funny because whenever we would talk blackjack, she'd be like, yeah, and you just got to wait. Yeah. She would have like all of these feedback about how to win at blackjack that was just hilarious. That's just so funny. I hope my mom doesn't see this, but
I mean, I obviously different cultures, but my fiance is Chinese, and there's been some funny stuff with less so her, but like her mom has some superstitions. Well, she like, but if we don't like follow them, it's Julie's fault that I've been unlucky. So it's like not my fault that like I did something that would cause me unlucky because I'm white. So like I wouldn't know. But like Julie being Chinese, she's supposed to know what would be lucky and unlucky. So like if we don't
power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. So her mom gets like mad at her. She'll be like, how can, like one of them was like, how can you let Chris like leave his shoes by the door? Like that's so unlucky. She's like, you have to leave them in the garage, not the door. And like Julie's like, well, like what is it about? She's like, you need to know this stuff.
Julie's the Spider-Man of translating the Chinese luck to you.
Yeah, it's also funny because she claims she doesn't believe, but then like if we're like looking for like an apartment or house, she's like, well, we got to choose a lucky number. I'm like, but you don't believe. She's like, but what if it's true? And I'm like, well,
yeah, there's all these. Yeah, it's funny. But yeah, so that's like getting into blackjack and poker was like, I had the opposite kind of support, but it was like a complete ignorance of like the reality of the chance of failure, probably. But
yeah, I think I mean, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's almost like I mean, I'm not saying my family wasn't like we're not like Daddy Warbucks or something, but I am certainly like I was able to graduate college without any debt. Like I'm extremely fortunate. So it's funny that the attitudes were almost different, right? Where like my parents were like, "Oh, you probably will fail, but like it doesn't even matter."
Yeah, and my parents were like, "You won't." Yeah, it's just a different.
It's an interesting
things, but
philosophy.
Yeah, philosophy. Well, because I think for a lot of people who are like who aren't wealthy though, and this is part of just American culture where they just there's this line from I can't remember who it's from, but they said like most Americans view themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Like that's how and I think that's really true at low levels of wealth where people just assume their good break is right around the corner for some reason. And so like I think it was that aspect of culture that was like, oh, this is the thing. This is the thing that, but
yeah, there's a bunch of interesting data that agrees with all this too. Not to get like particularly political, but there's a book that's called What's Wrong with Kansas. I don't know if you ever heard about this. So what it is Kansas, one of their main economies is farming, right? They have a bunch of farmers. Farmers in general do better with subsidies, right? They'll gain money from the government. It's better for them. Subsidies come generally more from the left. Just policy-wise, the left is more likely to give subsidies. So via this logic, Kansas should always be voting blue, right? It is in Kansas farmers' best interest to vote blue. They will make more money. This isn't saying like what's better for the country or anything, but they will make more money. It's a
pure set of incentives. Yeah.
But they never do. They always vote red, right? So like someone was like looking in, like, why is this? Why is a state that is purely incentivized to go one way going the other? And what they ended up finding is like the primary cause is if you're a really big farmer, the subsidies aren't great for you because they let other farms compete, right? So if you're the biggest farmer, you don't want them. But the thing is, every small farmer thinks they're going to be the biggest farmer. So everyone thinks that they're going to be the dude that's going to like win. And because everyone thinks they're going to be the dude that win, they want the policies that's best for them once they do win. Even though like we know like, hey, most of you aren't going to, and like you're going to be better off with these other policies. But that's just not the way like the American brain works. There's a bunch of stuff like this too, where it's like, do you think the economy is doing well? And people say no. And then it's like, do you think you're going to be better off in 3 years? And everyone says yes. Americans are very optimistic about themselves, but not others.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Again, I mean, there's this really. Have you ever read? Have you ever heard of Status Games by Will Storr?
No, I haven't.
So this is a really good book just about how status and the perception of status drives like so many human decisions and like human nature. But one of the things that he talks about, to be honest, I don't remember if this was in the book or a conversation with Will Storr on a podcast or both, but he references this policy shift from the Reagan administration. And this is where the Reagan administration really started pushing wealth as high status and all of the effects of that, where being individually wealthy, like where individualism really kicked off in America, really happened during the Reagan administration. And he points out that there are these really sinister quotes from like cabinet members under the Reagan administration where they literally say things like, we're trying to change the American soul. And like, that's like a quote from a cabinet member under the Reagan administration, which is just crazy. But they like that push to be like high status, to be high status is to be really wealthy, really prominent, really like to make a lot of money. That had a lot to do with the economy doing really well, but it also had a lot to do with like consumerism became so big during the Reagan administration that it really helped our economy, but it also like weakened a lot of, I don't know, weakened from my perspective, a lot of like values and ideas around group communities and ideas of what benefits the whole. And so then people became very individualistic. And when something is high status, you have to believe you're on the path to that because that is what your culture values. And if you don't value that, and if you don't signal that you're working towards that, your culture will like reject you, right? They'll like kick you out. So there's a lot of incentives to like, even beyond people believing they think they're going to do well in 3 years. It's people are heavily incentivized to signal they believe they're going to be doing better in 3 years, you know?
I also like, this will be like a small level of social commentary, but tagging on this, a lot of times you hear, I'm going to use the term identity politics, people talking about like, whatever, prejudice against certain races or whatever. And I think so many times that it's actually a classism and people are misconstruing the two. I think there's a lot of, now I think there is racism built into classism and whatnot, but I think a lot of America, like the prejudice comes from the idea that like you're poor compared to like the person who's rich, right? Like we do have this like belief nowadays that wealth signals aptitude, which I could go into a very long rant about how variance works, and if you have billions of people that play the highest variance strategies, even if they're not good strategies, are going to be the people at top in a billion hand sample.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I have to be careful to move. These are interests. Every podcast of mine, I don't know if you probably haven't listened to any of them, but we always spend way too much time talking about nothing that has anything to do with poker.
Okay, we can get into some poker. We can move on to the variance section of poker.
You're an expert on the variance section of poker.
That's more than some.
More than some. I do want to ask. I have some poker related questions. This is not going to be a smooth transition whatsoever. Yeah. What some of the things I was thinking about. So I've recently started getting good at MTTs. This is like a purely strategic thing that will interest people who are trying to strategically perform. And you're a great MTT player, so obviously I want to ask. So I'm recently studying MTTs. I say recently. I've been playing them exclusively for the last like 2.5 years. There are spots where. Okay, let me ask you this actually. Are you a big systematizer? Like, how do you approach like performing in the macro? Like, are you developing simplified strategies that you more or less use as a baseline? Like, just speak to me a little bit about how you strategically approach executing in the game.
Things have changed somewhat for me over the years, but I don't want to go like too much into like exact details or something, but I am a pretty structured in terms of, I would say pre-flop I give more looseness to. So I do have some pretty strong opinions about pre-flop, where I think that people treat it as this like boring static street, and I actually think it's like the most complicated, most interesting street by far. There's just like,
say more about that. Yeah.
So like, I mean, pre-flop is this thing, right? Like, we know it's nowhere close to raw equity. So just going to use 6-5 suited here as an example. 6-5 suited is like 48%, I think, against any two calls, right? Like, but it's not a bottom 50% hand. Like, we know this. Like, not that this is like some big reveal to people, but there's obviously like, it's because it has like really good equity realization. It hits boards, it bluffs well, etc. But like, you just have this thing where like pre-flop, the math is very complicated. Like even like your frequency, your like value to bluff ratios, especially as you get deeper, they're not really like, it's not really like you have like bluffs. You just kind of have like hands that have some board coverage and kind of have some equity classes and like
reduce certain they have some blocker effects. Like they reduce frequencies you're getting re-jammed on, and like, yeah.
And there's just like an infinite equilibrium of strategies pre-flop. I think this is the thing that people like don't account for. And like, especially if you start adding in like post-flop leaks or like post-flop mistakes, you literally just have like so many options for what you can do pre. I mean, to give the most extreme example, like let's say that like there's a guy in the big blind who every single time he gets a squeeze opportunity, he squeezes 25% of hands. Just regardless of the situation, he just takes the top 25% of hands and squeezes them. And like, this, like obviously, like once someone opens, you would like barely want to play a 3-bet range anymore, because you can always just back raise, because 1/4 of the time this guy's putting money in with nothing. And that's like a really obvious, but like pre just can get very complicated and very interesting, and there's a lot of ways to do it. So like obviously you had like the thing where like Dom Nietzsche for a while tried the limp and 3.5x. You could like 2.2x. You can do stuff like I'm probably one of the few people who's ever ran a test with this, but like I was curious. So like, let's say you're doing like a low jack open and like ace 9-0 is your bottom. You could delete ace 9-0. You could open 6-5-0 as your bottom. You lose no EV. There's like legitimately no EV loss. Your opponents have to change the strategy. What they 3-bet's different. Everything's different. The entire tree looks different. And like, all right, no EV loss is slightly incorrect. It is technically worse, but it is worse at such a small degree that nothing matters because everything about your frequency is the same. Well, it's worse because you don't have blockers because they have better hands.
And it's worse within the toy game, though, of all the adjustments being made. That's important, right? So, like, because like you said, there's all these adjustments that get made once you delete ace 9, you give 6-5, right? So it's worse within that toy game. To say that it's worse within the game you're playing, it might actually not make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that would be like, quote, worse is you're going to steal the big blind less because you don't have an ace. You're going to get 3-bet slightly more because you don't have an ace. But like, on your global EV, it's going to make a very little difference. And there's like a bunch of stuff like this too, where like you can start making like really interesting ideas. So like, let's say like you just decided to just open like ace 9-0 and king 9-0 instead of like king 10-0. I don't know, like you just wanted to mess with people. You would start to get spots where like your opponents would have to like fold like a bunch of the 9x in the big blind because like they're super dominated all the time, but now they would have to like defend other stuff that they wouldn't. Like you can just make the tree very complicated, and there's a bunch of ways where like all the EVs are like kind of identical. And then like as you add in like real human strategies and post flop leagues, I just think that pre is really interesting because I don't think there's like, I think when people talk about like GTO pre, it's actually like insanely lazy. I think there's so many options and so many like variables and so many things to consider.
That's fascinating because like when I think about the way you're talking about pre, and so like most of my career I've just played cash, right? Like I've just played cash. And granted, when I play live cash, I think about pre far more dynamically. I just find myself naturally.
It just is more dynamic live. Like it just is online. I mean, a lot of the fish are looking at Chult also. So like it's actually funny. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing online. I can like tell when the fish is looking at Chult.
You just wait the certain amount of timing.
Yeah. I'm just like,
yeah.
right.
But what's interesting is though, the kind of headspace I feel like you're describing is how I feel I play. And this is to your point, like this is how I feel I play post flop, like where I'm thinking far more fluidly and lucidly about like what I think people are doing. But pre-flop, you're right. I do have this sense when playing that decisions are just right or wrong. Like this, right? This like, it feels that way. It feels like if I'm picking the wrong hand, I'm doing the wrong thing, you know?
People think of this all the time. And like the stuff that's wrong, which is like folding your good hands, right? Like you don't just fold a hand that's winning. But these bottom hands just don't matter that much. And like you can use other bottom hands. And yeah, like they'll be kind of losing, but like if you actually like go into like Monk or GTO Wizard and you look at like the EV loss of like raising like min raising 6-5-0 under the gun, it's like 0.01 big blind. Now the problem is if you started opening that and made no adjustments, it would become like a big blind loss because you would just get 3-bet 30% by every player because you just can never defend. But
yeah. Well, and also if you open it and then you don't know how to, if you're not, let's say you're not aggressive post flop, right? Like you're going to punt tons of money with it, which is also a thing people make lots of mistakes with. But it's interesting because the hand that comes to mind, like post flop, is like I ran this bluff. The bluff might have been fine, but like really with this strong assumption that someone wouldn't have king 10 off because the way the hand played, there was a flush on the board, but like I was thinking like the number of hands that have the king of hearts alone was so low, if that makes sense. Yeah. But this guy had a straight. So this guy had a straight with the king of hearts, which I basically thought would never be happening. And so I thought there's just gonna be like way too many folds anyway. And I run this bluff. And then he shows up with king 10 off. And the point of this is a really good example of how like this is even playing certain hands people don't expect you to have can reward you with tons of money post flop. Like
I mean, I think that poker at like a true theoretical level and this is a nonsense thing that no one will ever do. This is just purely for computers. But I think not only should you have let's say you're playing 100 big blinds deep, not only should you have an infinite number of sizes available. So like the computer can bet 10%, 11%, 12% pot. It would have every possible bet size. It would also, I think, have it wouldn't be infinite because some strategies are just losing, but it would have a set of strategies that all have like equal EV, and it would also randomize which strategy is playing. So like imagine you're playing a spot where you could play like B33 and B67 on the flop, or you could play like B50 on the flop, right? And like we know the EV of like one of them has 60% pot, the other one has 60.1% of the pot. Like the EV's the same. So I think that there probably is something where like the computer would actually like be supposed to mix these strategies, and then like the computer playing against it would now have to play this like weird thing where it's like, okay, like I don't know which strategy is actually being played. Like I don't know if this guy's playing P or B66 or B66 B33 or like whatever, and then you'd have this like evolving game of like an infinite number of strategies, along with these strategies having an infinite number of sizes, if that makes sense. So like you would have this like with hand selection too, where like you'd be like, okay, this hand can be there. Like if this guy's playing this strategy, it can't be there if this guy's playing this strategy. So like on aggregate, I have to pretend it's heal this. Like it'd be some insanely complicated game.
This is why playing poker, though, exactly what you're describing. And one of the things that was really useful was working on the Ruse project, right? Because when you work on a project that is developing a solver, right, like all the things you're talking about come up, right? And I think people have this belief that poker is solved in a sense way more than it is. Like that there's just things that are just good, right? And I need to have Philip, who's the main developer for Ruse and who currently works for GTO Wizard, on the podcast, because what you're describing, especially with when you talk with him about preflop, it's really fascinating. Although the interesting thing that he will highlight is that when you shift preflop strategies, you don't really change your EV that much. You change everyone else's EV a lot more.
Well, so this is a whole other thing that once we start moving away from heads up sims, we don't know what we're solving for. Well, I think we're kind of lucky that the Nash equilibriums look generally correct, but like when you're solving heads up, you're solving for exploitability, right? So like you and I are playing. I mean, I guess you would know this from like Ruse. Like this is the way they walked, right? Like kind of Ruse walked different because it learned how to play poker. It didn't do CFR the same way.
Well, it still did CFR. So to be clear, it would do CFR, but the difference between it is it learned the future street play. Like it learned that right from self play, but it was still doing CFR in the street. It was solving for CFR, but yeah, it learned through self play.
I mean, it's different than like PO though, right? Well, PO is just a straight CFR every single time. There's no memorization. There's no self play. There's no learning.
Yeah, it's just to clarify. When Ruse is running and what is currently GTO Wizard AI is running. Now, I'm not the expert on this, but I feel confident this is true. But when it's running, it is running exactly like PO. The difference for it is that it solves, PO has to have the entire tree in memory. Ruse, or what is now GTO Wizard AI, knows the future, like at any terminal node, it knows the EV of it, and it knows that through a bank of self-play. Like it knows that through self-play. Like I've learned through self. But when it's solving on the street, it's running exactly like PIO. It's running a CFR algorithm very similar to PIO.
Yeah. I just meant that I had the self-play, which whatever speeds it up, but it's not even that relevant to this point. My point being is like when Ruse or PO or whatever, like when it's solving heads up, it's solving for exploitability, right? So we're saying like if I bet this hand and you fold this hand, you lose 0.1 big, like you don't lose, but like if you, let's say I bet this hand, you call, you win 0.1 big blinds by calling this hand, and then like whatever that adds up, and we end up with like an EV spectrum, and someone has an EV advantage. But when we're solving multi-way, we don't have that. We don't have this like promise that if you make a mistake, I win. I mean, it's like you're saying with preflop, like this is what's so interesting about just everything is gets multi-way. And I think this is why pre is the most interesting street to me, because it's the only street that's guaranteed to be multi-way every time. is there's no promise that if you make a mistake and I play perfect that the EV goes to me. Because all we've solved for is we've solved for an equilibrium where you can't make a change that benefits yourself. Doesn't mean you can't make a change that benefits somebody else. So we have an unstable Nash.
And this is true with ICM.
Yeah. Well, it's true. It's true with anything that is a multi-way equilibrium in poker. It's truthful. So it does.
Well, but I'm saying the interesting thing about ICM that I'd never thought about, and this is what Phil, last I talked with him, because they're working on solving multi-way right now, is even in a heads up spot in ICM, it is still a multi-way spot, right? That's the interesting thing, but I've never really thought about that. And it's the same thing. Your mistakes, like you can make mistakes that don't actually change your EV that much, but they change everybody else's a lot. Like you're deciding, does this guy get money or does the pool get money?
I mean, the clearest example is so like river play in ICM is just a generally misunderstood thing. I think people really underestimate how much equity you still need a lot of times. So like, I feel like people understand when we're saying like small blind versus big blind. The small blind goes all in. They're like, oh, like I need like a pretty good hand to call on the big. I have a risk premium. But like they get on the river and like someone puts them all in for pot or 1.5 pot, and all of a sudden they start thinking in chip EV. They're like, oh, is this guy bluffing like one out of 3 times? Like he bet pot, and it's like, dude, there's still a risk premium. Like you need this guy to be winning this hand like 50% of the time you call to call and make money. But like what can happen, like if this guy calls like a hand that's like 40% equity on the river, and you're the guy playing perfect ICM post flop on the other side, so you have a bluff ratio of like 50% bluffs because that's what it says. Well, like you're getting you're getting torched because this guy's like calling you and you just like have a bluff a ton. He's getting torched because he's not winning enough, and everyone else
and
is
the table's winning a ton.
Yeah, they'll make it a ton because you guys are just playing a gigantic pot that you're not supposed to be playing.
Yeah.
Well, and then ICM. So much. Sorry, I can rant about this forever, but there's so many things too. Like if people are too loose behind, like you open so tight, right? Like if I could note lock every person on my table to open 2% too wide, like, and I was under the gun, you're gonna open so tight.
Yeah, and this really gets to the point of like how, and you made, you said something like this, but I think this is a good point that a lot of people don't have an instinct for, which is in poker, there's obvious things that are wrong. But once you start getting into the realm of what is good, it gets far more vague. Like everything becomes so much more vague. And there is something to be said for like knowing your strengths and then like playing in a way that leans into your strengths, right? Like building, I'm just kind of thinking about how people are just so inclined to just like when you're talking about preflop, like in this discussion about preflop, what has made me think is like, I just need to start building more preflop opportunities that lead into my strengths. Like that is really, instead of thinking even about what, and that is plus EV, but like, like playing, for example, like it might be better. Like one thing that I've been kind of working on at my preflop strategy is I don't think I 3-bet quite enough. I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this, but I also think I play deeper stacked post-flop play better than most people because of my cash background. So it's like, maybe that's just good. Maybe that's just better. I mean, it's hard because you get fold when you 3-bet and like, you pick up EV that way, but.
I mean, it's a hard one to answer, right? Because like, this is where like poker's really tough. And I'm a huge fan of solvers. I'm not the guy who's like, the solvers are wrong. The computer's better than us at poker. Like, even when I'm saying these multi-way equilibriums have issues, if we put a 6 max thing playing all these equilibrium and we all play, it's going to smash us. So I'm not claiming that like we know better, but it is very confusing because it's like, okay, let's say you get XEV from flatting, but like you never get fold equity pre. So it's like, okay, how much is a fold worth? And then also like, I don't know, maybe
how sticky are people to the 3-bet though too? Also like,
yeah, how sticky are they to the 3-bet? And then like also like maybe the person you're playing against is good in single raise pots. Like I don't know. Like it's hard to know. Like you might be against someone who is just the worst player ever on 3-bet pots out of position, but they're like kind of reasonable in single raise pots.
They're more studied, like spots are more studied.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think people don't think about sometimes is So there's a lot of fish. I mean, there's a lot of things with this, but there's a lot of fish who, like, generically the leak is that they don't put enough money in overall with the range, but then a certain subset of the range they put too much money in. Right. So like this is like a classic fish thing. They 3-bet and like they check fold ace king on 7-6, like on 10-3-2, but like if this guy has pocket sevens, he just like calls down or something. Like those, just like he has X class that's gonna put all the money in and not. So like these guys can be really bad at deep stacks, right? Like you have a deep SPL against a guy like this, he's tailable. But you start putting this guy at like a shallow SPL, like the stuff becomes like much less bad. He's just like taking all his hands that are pretty good and like putting them in. So like you can also like think about like who it is opponent wise. Like some guys gonna be better or worse with different stack depths.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess like I think what I like about this though is I do see the game slowly moving into just this more dynamic thing that is more interesting. Like I think we had a phase of poker that was so solver oriented in trying to replicate solver play. For me at least, there was a portion of poker that started feeling like, is this really what the future of poker is going to be? That we're like all just like trying more and more and more to replicate solvers. And I think the more people that I talk to, the more that is not really, we just understand that as much as we might try to replicate solvers, no human being really can. And as long as that's true, you just have this incredibly complicated game on your hands that like there's always room to make a lot of adjustments and you know personal decisions about how you want to play.
Yeah, it's I mean there's so much. Like the biggest thing to like, if anyone's ever done any of these no docs, you can go do this in GTO Wizard right now. Like go to the AI, take one of the bluffs, reduce it by 1%, and just lock all combos. So instead of like bluffing an optimal frequency, the thing's going to be off by 0.1%. You're going to see that every single bluff catcher is going to fold. Do it the opposite way, every single bluff catcher is going to call. Like, and it's like, so like the second anything's off by any amount, you get these like really gigantic strategic changes. So yes, as long as humans are like not perfect, which we never will be, you're going to constantly have this space available to gain EV and like make adjustments. And I mean, I will say though, like, wow, I think this is all interesting and good. I also think that a lot of people would be a lot better off just playing good cards. Like I just like, I'm saying like even at like high levels, like I see so many people get into making exploits and they end up just playing worse poker than if they just played good.
Yeah, I mean, I really, from my perspective, I mean, this is also true from my background, though. I really do think what happens is where those exploit originates from. Like, do they originate from
are they real or are they emotional?
Yeah, are they like emotional or are they based out of like fear? Like, I just don't want to miss an opportunity to exploit somebody, or is it like, no, you're perceiving a genuine leak and you have a genuine intuition that something is deeply off here, and like, there's a really big difference between the two, and that's really murky water. Like it's really hard to know in game which is which, you know.
One of my favorite stories is I think Ike was playing, it might have been Big Bet, but for some reason I think it was Mix, but he was playing Mix online, and he told himself every single time he won a hand he had to stand up and do a little happy dance. So he would like not win a hand, sorry, if he called the river and won a hand he would be like, all right, I won. But the reason is because he like knew that like when you call the river, you mostly lose. I really think that as much as like this is mathematically true, humans just like struggle with this. Like if you face half pot, you call the river, you're going to lose like 75% of the time if the guy's playing correctly.
Well, dude, and I just, you know, and this is a good example of this is like I said, I'm learning MTTs, right? And so like I go through long stretches of like basically getting hands and then doing database review to see like, okay, how am I doing? My latest one, my intuition was I'm doing a terrible job at bluff catching. That was my intuition, was like I have to be just torching money in bluff catching. And then I get into my database and I'm doing great. Like I'm like right like at what I think I should be. And it's just because of exactly what you just said. It's so hard to have an intuition for. And the truth is, like, if you feel like you're crushing bluff catching, you're probably not calling enough. You're probably winning too often. Like, you're probably, yeah.
No, that's what I was gonna say. So like, you have this like emotional thing where you're constantly losing when you call the river, right? So it's really easy to get into the exploit that like I should never pay. And there have been so many people who I have seen not win a tournament, that they were dealt the win in the tournament because they tried to exploit somebody. Like it, I mean, I like really good poker players too. Like I'm not trying. I mean, and like sometimes all spots where like I think you should make huge exploitative folds. I'm not telling people not to. I'm not saying, but like I do think it's really easy to fall into this thing where like you convince yourself you're doing something that's an exploit, and like you're just doing something that's emotional. And I see this all the time at high stakes. I think actually the higher the stakes are, the more true this is. Low stakes players do it because they just don't know poker well enough. So like they have nothing to base a decision off of besides emotion. High stakes players generally do it because the stakes have gotten so big that they can't control their emotions anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I also think like a good indicator of this though is like what is the reason you're doing it? Like when you see people thinking, anytime a kind of categorical thought enters your mind, like people don't bluff these spots enough, right? You're off base.
I mean, kind of.
It depends on what you mean by these spots,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I mean. Like because if you take this at the lowest level, you just have people who make even far-reaching or like people don't bluff enough, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing is like the more your exploit is more likely to be correct, the more it's rooted to this spot, like this situation, this exact situation you're in. The further out you branch, right? And that's why where you see, and because what you just said is one of the hard things about poker, where you're like, I still think you should make big folds. That's what's hard is like the answer to every spot is unique. This could be a spot where calling is torching, and this could be a spot where,
it just is. It depends. I mean, it's the old Doug Polk thing, right? Like he'd be like, I think this hand should call, raise, and fold.
Yeah.
But like, it's true. And one thing with poker, and like, it's funny because like you and I have talked a lot. For those who don't know, like I've worked with Jared, and like done some of his mental game coaching, and like I am terrible at accepting that I'm going to make mistakes. I have a deep belief that I should be more intelligent and better than everyone I'm playing poker against. I'm not saying that this is a rational belief or a true belief, but I'm saying when I'm playing, this is like how I go in. Like I feel like I should just fuck on everyone, every hand. And like the truth is like I'm not good enough to do that. And that's not like a diss against me. It's just no one in the world is good enough to do this. Like I'm going to make wrong decisions all the time. And it drives me insane. But like the guys who all the best for the longest time and succeed, they can do this. They can just be wrong over and over and over again and keep trusting themselves. And it's a really unique skill. I think no one is better in the world than Ike. Which I think Ike's the best. Like Ike is number one on my all-time poker player list. He would be my goat. But like, so when I'm saying like, oh, Ike is wrong all the time, I'm not saying like he's some bad poker player. So no hot takes here. But like, he is the most okay with being incorrect of anyone I've ever seen playing poker. It just is what it is.
And it's an understated skill, like you're saying, because the truth is when you're willing to be wrong more often, you're learning at the fringes of your knowledge more often, right? Like you're pushing the fringes of what you understand about the game more often. I think that's the real value.
And like you're going to be brilliant sometimes, right? Like you're giving yourself the chance to actually like find brilliance.
Yeah, definitely. I had a question for you. Speaking about other players, I watched a video, again, no hot takes here, but like I watched a video of you and Nick P breaking down the same hands, like on I think it was what's that company?
It was GTO Lab, yeah.
GTO Lab, yeah, thank you. Yep. Okay. On the GTO Lab, their video. Did you watch it? Did you watch Nick P's thoughts on the hand?
I watched it. Yeah, I watched it.
I don't know if you want to comment on it, but I'm curious, were you surprised by his approach to randomizing and like the way he approached?
I'm not surprised. Knowing him and like the way he thinks about poker. Yeah, I remember it was less of a structured randomization, and it was more of a, hey, like I could use this card to randomize, but then you're not really randomizing, you're just doing a pure option with this hand. I don't think that's necessarily bad strategically. I do think it's incorrect, but I don't know if it's incorrect in a way that matters. Would be my take. Like, I do stuff like this out of big blind 3-betting. I will say is like there's a lot of spots where I generically know what my frequencies should be like shallow. So I will say deep stack poker is so much harder to understand like what your pre-flop range should be like by pure math. So like if someone tells me what I should 3-bet 200 big blinds deep, big blind was button, I can tell them, but I can tell them because I looked at a chart and memorized it. I can't tell them because I understand the spot. If you ask me like some ICM spot with 25 to 30 big blinds, I can give you a range that's probably going to be same EV but incorrect from the computer, and I'm just going to do a bunch of PO combos. So like I do think those spots that you should do what Nick was doing, but it's not correct via the computer, because the thing with the computer is one of the reasons it randomizes in a bunch of spots is it wants to use a bunch of different classes and a bunch of options, so you as the opponent don't have like a dominant card or class to have. So like pre-flop, you see this. Let's say that like all opponent raises the small blind and we're going to bluff the big blind in some ICM spot. If you go look through the spot, you're going to see like some offsuit combo of basically every card 2 through 9 being used in some way. So it might be like ace 2 gets used, king 3, queen 8 might get used, whatever. The reason being is like it doesn't want the small blind to be able to be like, oh, I have ace 8 suited and he never bluffs with an 8. So the 8 is like this like super plus EV 4-bet jam. It makes tons of sense. And there's no way it matters in real life.
Yeah. That's fair. That's funny. Cool. Well, I guess we're at about an hour. I guess we'll just wrap up talking. Like, I know you've been working with poker coaching and stuff. Like, how's that been going? Like, you're producing like a course for them, or you have already, or what's the nature of that?
Yeah, so I've done some content for them so far. Have done courses with other coaches. Am going to work on doing some more unique stuff, but it's still in the works, so not too much there. And then, but working with them has been great. The company I think is really good. I think it does a good job of reaching out to clientele that some of the other sites forget about, which is, well, I think we have high quality content, and like I'm there to try to be more for the high stakes player. There's also a lot of stuff for the guys that play 1-2 and 2-5 that I think other sites have somehow forgotten about. While that is what 96% of the poker playing population or something. I'm making up a number here. Don't take that as like a real stat.
But it has to be though, right? Like I agree with you. I mean, poker coaching they have to speak to the widest like demographic of poker players in terms of like, it has to be, right?
Yeah. And then I've been doing that, and from there I've gotten into doing more private coaching lately, which is it's an interesting thing, coaching privately. I do like it, but it is very interesting to like, because I've now worked with like a bunch of students from a bunch of different levels and backgrounds and games, and like there's a lot of ways that people think about poker, correct and incorrect.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my follow-up question for you, was how much like one-on-one private coaching you do, or how much you have done, because I personally, coaching has one, it's been one of the most rewarding parts of actually having a background in poker, is getting to coach poker. I don't coach a ton of poker now, but when I used to, But also, it's actually one of the things that I think improved my game some of the most, coaching. Like, you hear from, like you said, like so many diverse backgrounds, and you hear from, I mean, dude, one of the shocking things when I was playing 2KNL online and I was coaching some of the people in my pool, realizing like I have been massively overestimating the level at which you think about this game in some ways. Or not the level, but like the degree to which you are sometimes even like you're thinking about this way more complexly than me, but like that's why you can't come to a reasonable decision in these spots, is like you're just, and that was pretty shocking. Like,
so this is something I constantly am telling people I coach, and constantly telling like friends at high stakes and everything, and I include myself in this. And this is to every podcaster. You guys have to have more disrespect in your game for your opponent. Your opponent sucks. I suck. Everyone sucks. Humans suck at poker. It is what it is. And like, there's so many spots where people are so willing to give credit to someone for being really good. And even if the person is, in an objective sense, an amazing poker player, in this spot, you can't treat them like that. And I think a lot of times, if people would be more willing to be disrespectful in their game, they would gain a lot of win rate. It's just there's so many nodes that there's no reason you need to give your opponent credit for doing something. And I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm not saying aggressive, passive, whatever, but like
all of it. Yeah. All of it depending on the spot, right? Like, yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And
we've all been check raised in the spot where your opponent's never checked value in their life. And like, I would say generally that check raises are strong. So I'm not like, I don't think this is like a global read. I would like generally be like, yeah, check raises, they probably don't bluff most of the time, but like there's just these spots where like the guy has the nut flush blocker and he reps it, and you're like, dude, you've never checked the nut flush draw twice in your life, and like now you're trying to check raise the river on me. Like, I just don't, there's no way.
yeah. And I think one of the things that's I think misleading for people, and why I think these statements can sound confusing, is when you say like people give them credit for being good. In these moments where people are giving people credit for being good, the level of good, like people think what good players are is delusionally good. Like, what it means to be a great poker player is to have mistakes all over the place. It's just fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes in the certain absurd directions. That's kind of what we were saying before, where it's like there's lots of ways to just be wrong, but there's lots of gray area within that. But yeah, I think when people hear that, it's like, no, you're thinking these players are good. It's like, no, you're giving them credit for being perfect. That's the problem. Like, no one deserves credit for being perfect at any spot, at any part of the game tree. Like, no one deserves it,
Well, and like, I'm going to just use like river bluffing or something as an example. Like, there's certain spots where for someone to actually be bluffing correctly, they need to like have planned ahead for this exact scenario, right? I'm not saying that there aren't people who do this, but generically, I think those are spots where even against people who try really hard to be balanced, you can like be like, hey, like this isn't the spot, just because like, the range has arrived in a way that's incorrect from theory. So like 3-bet pots on like high boards can be a really good example. There's spots where like an imposition 3-bet, let's say the board comes like I don't want to use one with suited connectors exist. So let's do like, you're pretty shallow. So we're at like 30 big blinds or 25 big blinds. So there's this there's a lot of trace 3-bet calling with like 6s and 7s. If you look through the pre-flop tree. And there's a pre-flop reason for it, which is you induce ace-5 suited, you might induce pocket 5s, and like jamming's inefficient because like you just fold out hands you beat. So like that's but they still jam sometimes. But you'll see these hands like, so they're going for the 3-bet call. but they're also there because like every one of your other everything else you're using is high card oriented, right? So you're using like let's say you're 3-betting the big line against the button at 40 bigs. You're using, you know, some ace XO, some king XO. Maybe you have a little queen XO, or like maybe there might be some 10-7-0 in there, but like you're using a bunch of stuff that's high calls. You're not using, you know, 6-5-0. So like you start getting this board that comes king, queen, or like ace, king, 10, jack or something. If you haven't planned ahead that you're going to have some like 6s and 7s in your range or whatever, you're going to have nothing to bluff with. And like that doesn't mean the person's like even like a bad poker player. It's probably not worth doing.
Or I think you have things to bluff with, but your bluffs become even more unintuitive, right? I think that's exactly the point, right? They become even more unintuitive. Like
that's the truth. If you gave the computer the range that doesn't have the right pre-flop hands, they might just start bluffing with some king X that like doesn't interact with your ace X that'll fold. Like there will be some stuff that starts happening, but my point being is like it just becomes this spot where like they have to have like planned ahead, like way ahead, not even like on the flop. They have to have been like very like, I have to do this in case this happens, and like it's just not worth doing.
yeah, and that's basically what you're saying is just like the more unique the scenario is, people are just they haven't planned for it. Yeah, it's not possible, and it'd be a waste of time to plan for it. Like you're saying,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a game tree that's bigger than atoms in the universe. You're gonna run into you're gonna run into a spot you've never seen and you're not planning for it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I don't want to belabor it too much, but I do think there's some interesting quality where it's like the really good, at least when I can tell I'm playing at my A game, and the poker players who I talk to, I can tell play their A game more often. There's this quality of like responsiveness where it's like, I just recognize, oh, I'm in a really weird spot, and oh, I'm seeing an action that's really weird. And like, it's not like I planned for this or I have this exploit ready. I just am not so caught into a certain way of thinking that all of these facts are obvious to me. Like, this is a very rare situation, and I'm seeing an action that is very rare, and I can't make these things mesh with anything that like seems like a good strategy. And then it's just, what do I do? Like, do I make big exploits and folds, calls, raises, bluffs, like whatever, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be I guess I'm going to talk about my own highlight or something, but like I think like my big poker highlight is like the handle I folded the king high flush to S-spin. That's like the big one. I don't know if anyone knows it. Well, like a 200K final table, and I opened king 10 of clubs under the gun. He flats. I think 8-handed or 9-handed. He flats two after me, so he flats either the low jack or U7. The board comes jack 9-8, 3 clubs. So I just flop the nuts. I check call. Turns a jack, check. He bets like 60% of the pot. I call. River's like some low called. Check. He goes all in, and I fold it, and he had quads. It's like the big highlight fold I've made or whatever. But like it was just some spot. It had nothing to do with like S-spin as a poker player. It wasn't like, oh, S-spin's some huge nit or S-spin's super bad or anything like this. It was just like some spot where like, what a final table. So S-spin would have to have like planned ahead for this scenario. We have like jack 9-8, jack mono, and he like B60s the turn and then goes for stacks when we're like, he was chip leader and I was like folding chips or something. Like it's just like some crazy spot. Like he don't even flat offsuit hands pre. Like he probably 3-bets ace queen O almost every time here. He doesn't have ace 10-0. Like he has some 3% flatting range to start with. Like he had jacks, which makes sense, but he just kind of has like, he might not even have nines.
Quads in this hand?
Yeah, he had quads. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because I still had an out. We could have had the queen of clubs with the 7 of clubs for like the sickest final table hand of all time.
Yeah, and like the hands you all highlighted, I think what's useful to point out for people is like people have a certain way of categorizing what makes a good bluff, right? So you're starting, especially in this spot, like they need the right blockers, right? And so you can just say like, what hands do they have that fit that? Like nothing.
Yeah, so like it was like a spot where like I think it looked very cool. like it's like, oh wow, like you fold king high flush, but like I think it was a spot where like if you're like actually like on your A game and like mentally focused and playing well, I think a lot of people in the world would have found the fold. I don't think it was like unique to me. The only thing unique was like I was just in a good headspace to like realize where I was at. I think in like a less good headspace, I would have gotten like, well, my hand's just too good. Which was interesting because like even in theory, my hand was actually a fold. It wasn't even like theoretically too good. Like this node was just like some crazy node. But like I didn't fold because like I knew what it was in theory. I was just like, it was just a spot where I was like, hey, this is a crazy spot that like neither of us have ever played before. Like we don't know the answer. Like let's actually try to think about this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great spot to leave things. Yeah, I really appreciate you doing this. Go ahead.
No problem.
You know, where can people find you? Plug anything you want before we go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter, Instagram. If anyone is at all interested in private coaching, my rates are $1K an hour for one session or $3K an hour for 5 sessions. And you can just message me on Instagram or Twitter.
$3K an hour for 5 sessions, or $3K for 5 sessions?
That would be a hell of a price model. $3K for 5 sessions. Yeah, thank you for correcting me. Yeah, you want more?
I'm cutting out the clarification. I'm cutting out the correction. No, I'm just letting people think.
I would like to have that clear. Like $3K for 5 sessions, $1K an hour for 1 session.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to do that, you can message me. I usually do a deal too that the full session, you pay $1K up front for. If you don't like it, you pay $600. I'm saying this wrong. I got all distracted now. You have the 5 sessions for $3K. The full session, you pay the $600 up front for. If you don't like it, we can discuss and figure out what makes sense. I'm not doing like, you're not stuck with the $3K forever or whatever. I'm not like a complete dick on it.
You're more generous than me. I think I generally just tell people like, we do an intro call. If you're in, you're in. Like I'm not.
I've never had someone cancel, so
me neither. But
maybe that's why. I'm overconfident here.
Yeah, that's fair. Awesome, man. Well, I'll talk to you later. See you around the streets.
See you.
See you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. That was Chris Brewer. If you enjoyed this content and you want to see more from me, please like and subscribe. But until next time.